It's slowly starting to look like a motorcycle again. Okay, let's get the front cleaned up a little bit, then we can put the windscreen and the mirrors back on. This rubber is just discolored with age. It's pretty much nothing we can do about that other than replace it, of course. It just attaches with 4 little tabs. Next, let's put the windshield surround on. So there's a piece of velcro here that attaches here, and there are a few interlocking bits that lock in. There are 2 interlocking bits here that lock into these 2, and then it gets bolted on with the mirrors. Next, I put the windshield on, remembering that these 2 central ones are held on by a nut, and there's an interlocking tongue here that goes into slot. So the windshield sits behind the fairing, and then there are 2 standoffs here that the nut goes through, the middle nuts go through, the bolts go through, and nut on the back. So this is as far as I want to go with the fairings for right now, because we still have easy access to do all our fluids, or do the engine fluids at least right now. So I'm going to next change the oil and fill the coolant up, and leaving the rest of the panels off gives us access to all that. The remaining panels should be fairly easy to get fit, should be pretty straightforward. So we'll fit these panels right at the end. Let's move on to doing the oil change and the coolant. Now obviously, before changing the oil, we're gonna have to put the crankshaft sensor cover back on. So I already have most of this stuff cleaned up and ready to go. There's just a couple of tips here. One is I'm going to seat the O-ring gasket into this, but I'm just going to use a little bit of grease. Any grease will do here, just to hold this thing in place while I'm putting it on, so that it doesn't pop off and we end up pinching the O-ring. So just like 4 little spots of grease. Should do plenty. Then try and seat this guy in here. That should hopefully keep this guy from falling off while we try to install it. So, just essentially enough to keep it from dropping out of the groove while we're trying to install it. So I made that mistake before. The other thing we're going to have to do is apply silicone right here where this rubber grommet is, as well as this little split in the cases on both sides where the top and bottom half of the cases meet. So we'll just put a little bit of RTB silicone on both these places. Just the tiniest smear should do. The other thing I'm going to do beforehand is we're going to need to put thread locker on all these. As I noted when we were taking these off, all of them have just blue thread locker on them. I checked in the manual and it's thread locker, not thread seal. One other thing to watch out for is there are two clamps here that route the wiring harness that need to get bolted on with the cover. But for just now, I think we're going to leave those two bolts out and secure this with a couple of different bolts. Assuming this is the correct orientation. Before I tighten these bolts, I'm just going to check that the O-ring is not sticking out anywhere. So like I think I mentioned, I went ahead and cleaned all the bolt holes as well as the bolts since they had old thread locker on them. So I made sure to get as much of that off as possible. So I'm just going to hand tighten these and leave them for a few minutes. Let the silicone set up. The instructions for this particular RTB silicone, which is the Toyota FI-PG, is to hand tighten the bolts and then leave it for 15 minutes before you do the final torque. In this case, I don't think it matters a whole lot because the final torque is very small, but it's like 53 inch-pounds, I believe. So, but I'm still going to just leave it, and we'll come back and torque this to spec in a second. Oh, by the way, this is the part number, but I will leave the part numbers in the description. It's been 15 minutes and I'm going to now torque these down. The torque spec on these is 9.8 Newton meters or 87 inch-pounds. I'm going to go over it twice because the gasket compresses when you torque it down. Alrighty, this should be all set. Next thing I'm going to do is get the cooling system filled up with distilled water. So we're going to flush the system out of the old coolant and then replace it with engine ice. So to do that, I have to flush it with distilled water a couple of times so that all the old coolant is out. Like track organizations require that you run engine ice and you have all your old coolant fully flushed out. Even with this tiny bit of fairing on, it's still quite a bit of a pain in the butt to get access to the top of the radiator. Flexible fan works a lot better for this. Hopefully I have it situated so it's not going to drip a whole bunch, but just in case it does, stick this pan down here. This is just regular distilled water. Let me make sure before that I actually have the drain plug sealed off, which I don't. That's what I thought. I'm just using this old copper washer because we're going to be taking this off multiple times. I'm just going to snug this up. Back to what I was doing. Okay, the cooling system capacity is 2.5 liters, so it should be about 2/3 of this. You want to fill it really slowly and allowing the bubbles to come up, and also occasionally squeeze the hoses so I can get any air bubbles out of it. And as I'm going, I'm also checking if I have any leaks. I can just about see coolant coming up towards the radiator neck, so I'm going to close this and add some water to the reservoir, and then we can heat cycle it. Actually, I think I'm gonna take this mirror off so that I can top off this reservoir. Reconnect the battery and get the bike ready to be able to start. I'm going to take the bike off the lift so that I'm in a position where I can take it out of the garage, warm it up, let it fully heat cycle, and do both the coolant and oil change. Because I need to let the coolant cycle through so that all the remaining like regular glycol based coolant comes out. Okay, let me do that. Bike outside now. I'm gonna start it up and let it heat cycle. What did we do? Obviously, the bike is not starting. So I'm going to try to do some troubleshooting. I quickly took the gas tank off and just looked to see if I had left any connectors loose or something dumb like that, but I can't spot anything obvious. And if I'm reading the manual correctly, if we ground this wire for 2 seconds, it should turn on the diagnostic mode and give us like a diagnostic trouble code using the fuel injection light or the FI, what they call the FI light. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so I got the DTCs working. As you can see, the FI light is now blinking. So that's giving us our DTC. So it's 2 long blinks and 1 short blink, but like I think the short blink just signifies that's the last one in the series. So what I had to do was actually reconnect the tank and crank on the bike again, and then when the fuel light, FI light was on steady, Then I had to ground this for 2 seconds, and then the light popped up, the DTC popped up. So this DTC tells me, so it's this guy, so it's 2 and then 1. So there's crankshaft sensor malfunction. So then I remembered that we had unplugged the crank sensor, so I traced this wire back, and I can see in here that it's really hard to see, but I can see in here that I left the crank sensor unplugged. It's one of these wires. So I'm going to take the tank off again and retrace the crank sensor and plug it in correctly. Whew. After much struggling, finally have it plugged in. Okay, awesome. I think the bike should start now. Fingers crossed. Okay, I'm going to take it outside and start it and warm it up. Right, I'll be back when we're warm. Heat cycled the bike once. It's fully warm. The fan has come on, and all that stuff has happened. So, it's putting to everything. No leaks. Bike looks and sounds perfect. I'm gonna give it a few revs. Alright, now I'm gonna bring the bike in and drop the oil right now, and then once it cools off, we'll drop the coolant and repeat this process again. Fresh washers. Torque spec is 20 Newton meters. New OEM filters. Filter looks like it comes pre-lubricated, but I'm going to put a smear of oil on it. Torque spec for the filter is 23 pound-feet. Press 300V 1040. Oil capacity is 3 liters for this bike. I'm going to again drain the coolant. Now, depending on how clean this coolant looks, it should be ideally only water. But obviously, we're going to have a little bit of a mix of old coolant as well. Now, I'm going to leave this threaded in while I take the radiator cap off. So I don't want it spraying all over the place. So it looks like it's mostly just water. I think we can go ahead and install. We can go ahead and install the engine ice into it now once I drain this out fully and put in a new copper washer. There's a second drain plug here that drains the cylinders. Fresh copper washers for both the drain plugs. Torque spec for both drain plugs is 9.8 Newton meters or 87 inch-pounds. Fresh engine ice. So I can see that the coolant is basically right to the top of the radiator. So now I'm going to just quickly start the bike with the radiator cap off and let all the bubbles come out to bleed the system. And before I do that, I'm going to just spray off all the excess oil that came off where the oil filter mounts and onto the exhaust and stuff. We're still going to get a little bit of smoke, but let's give it a quick blast with brake clean. The coolant level is dropped a little bit, so I'm just going to top it off, and then we can close the cap and fill the reservoir. I got the last of the remaining water out of the reservoir. Now I'm just going to top it off up to the full mark with engine ice. Now I'm going to start it up and heat cycle it fully. the bike has been fully heat cycled and it's still warm, so I ran it till the temperature went all the way up over 200. The fan came on, temperature dropped back down. So we know the thermostat opened, the coolant, the engine ice has circulated fully through the system. And as it cools, before we finally put the panels back on, I will check and see that the level is set correctly. I'll also check the oil level, which looks to be just about right. Like halfway between, it's exactly where it should be. So that is set. Now I'm going to start putting the rest of the panels on. I'm going to remove my diagnostic wire here, hook up the battery tender, start putting all the rest of the panels back on. Let's jump on that. For this panel, only thing to note is there are two interlocking tabs or three interlocking tabs on this part that will click in, and then there's these three grommets, and then the screws go on. It's been a few hours and the exhaust is nice and cool now. There's only one interlocking tab on this one. I'm going to go do the interlock on the other side. So there are a couple of screws left, but they're really hard to see. So this one on this side and the same one on the other side. But I'm going to put those in. bike is fully done, fully reassembled, coolant and oil changed, coolant flushed, and we are using engine ice now. Yeah, fresh oil in the system, valve clearance is checked, everything is back together. I'm gonna have to look up the torque specs for the GPR steering stabilizers. I don't have those offhand, but other than that, everything is fully torqued down. Bike looks perfect, no issues. Right now it is like -2 Celsius or like 30, close to 30 Fahrenheit, something like that, 28 Fahrenheit. So there's no question of test riding it. But when I do test ride it in the summer, I will put an update video on. Alright, that's it. See you on the next one.